On this cold winter morning, as you can see, I'm Steve Brown, and this is the video edition of my blog, Rants and Raves. This episode is titled Hominem unius tabula timeo. Boy, that's a mouthful, and before you criticize my pronunciation, I speak Protestant Latin, not Catholic Latin. Some years back in Poland, a Polish colleague said, "Steve, you pronounce Polish pretty well, but your Latin is funny." Okay, this is my version of a saying variously attributed to St. Thomas Aquinas or St. Augustine of Hippo, which was hominem unius libri timeo. I fear the man of one book. There, now that saying has been interpreted various ways, two main ways. One of them being, I fear the ignoramus who knows exactly one book, and that's all he knows, and he sees the world through the lens of that one book. There's an alternate interpretation that there's a man of genius who specializes in one area, so he has such a formidable intellect, he can discourse in great depth on one subject. Something the lady Dame Barbara Shenfield said was the advantage of the House of Lords was that you couldn't say something nonsensical about an obscure subject because there was sure to be somebody in the back benches who'd made it his life's work, his life study. But my interpretation is a version of the former. And to explain to you what I mean by this, I'm going to start to present you. What's this? All right, what's this? Well, it's a map, idiot. Anything else you want to know? Yes, it's a map. It's a map, in fact, of an area of Minnesota. Now, what's this? It's a map, genius. In fact, it is a shaded 3D relief map, which gives you the contours of the terrain of the state. What's this? Yeah, we're going to go round and round like this. It's a freaking map. In fact, it's a freaking map of Minnesota. This happens to be a map of the snow depth ranking as of February 7th, 2008. How about this? What's this? Are we gonna go through this all night? No, we're not. Bear with me. It's also a map. It's also a map of Minnesota. What this is a map of Minnesota voting patterns. 2016 Minnesota House election results as of 8:27 and 51 seconds a.m. on November 9th. This shows, of course, the blue and the red areas of Minnesota. Minnesota is considered a blue state, but look, lo and behold, the big majority of the area is in fact rural and red. The blue dominates a few areas, urban areas of high population density. So what's the point? Which of these maps is true? Or which of these maps is most accurate? How about this one? Is that an accurate map? Yeah, I use it to regularly get around when I'm in the state, yes. So then, if that's a good and accurate map, this is false. No. Each map has a particular function for what you want it for. To say that one is true and one is false is, how did somebody put it? It's not even wrong. It makes no sense at all. It said, this map is truer than this map. Well, if you're talking about voting patterns, yeah. If you're talking about how to get to the Mall of America, well, you're going to have a really hard time navigating to the Mall of America with this one, or even this one. This tells you nothing about where the roads are. Oh, well, so why don't we combine them all together and make one big map that contains all of this data? Think about what that would look like for just a second, aside from the fact that putting this color scheme with this shading scheme would make absolutely no sense, would be totally incompatible. It would be too big. It has too much information, and most of it would be irrelevant to any particular purpose you have, no matter what that purpose is. What am I getting at with this? Am I discoursing on cartography? Do I have a new hobby? Well, sort of. At this point, I would like to remind you of a saying of one Alfred Korzybski, who founded one of those flaky, sort of cultish pseudoscientific movements, general semantics, which actually in time evolved into the respectable discipline of semantics. No, but he said, a map is not the territory. I want to get to Minneapolis. The first thing, I don't put this on the ground and step on the map. I use it as a guide. Now, what am I getting at with this? Have you waited long enough? Have I caught your attention yet? My point about this is we look at the world in a series of models, or you could call them maps. More often we call them models. Now, when I try to interpret contemporary events, for example, I've done it in a number of different ways. If you've seen any of my other videos, I've talked, for example, about my ruling class crisis video number 3, I've talked about the need, basically the need of people to feel important, to feel significant, to feel validated and such, expressed as a desire for power, a desire to feel better than other people. So that's sort of, it's a psychological point of view. Other people might talk about people's desire for, as I mentioned and touched in passing, on, for example, economic security. Their desire, a little deeper on the Maslowian pyramid there, to feel safe and secure. At this, do they contradict each other? No, not really. It's a way of looking at phenomena from different directions. Now, when Aquinas or Augustine, whoever, said, "I fear that man of one book," this is what I think he was talking about, because I've seen a lot of people of one book I know actually have a shelf full of books. I'm going to touch on that in a minute. The desire to feel secure, safe, is very often intellectually expressed as a desire for a toe. What's that? TOE, a theory of everything. And this, by the way, is something that highly intelligent people are most often prone to. Highly intelligent people look at the universe and they go, "Oh, wow, this is a big, scary place." And as I mentioned in my last video on magical thinking, a lot of our insecurity, the insecurity that leads to magical type thinking, is about what is beyond our control. Any intelligent person is going to realize that an awful lot of life, in fact most of life, may be beyond our control. That, well, we may increase our locus of control. They're acting together in society and such. We create things like civilization, as I noted in my video lecture on what is this thing we call civilization. But no matter how far our control extends, and hopefully in the future it will extend much, much farther, we're never going to grasp the whole thing. We're never going to be able to control most of reality, nor are we going to be able to understand it all in one big theory. Nonetheless, the desire for one theory that explains everything, that you can plug all phenomenon into, is very, very strong in some people, in particular people who are morbidly afraid of living with uncertainty. Alan Watts wrote a book called The Wisdom of Uncertainty, and there is a great deal of wisdom of uncertainty. I might also note that Alan Watts was an alcoholic who evidently started drinking vodka early in the day, and everybody was supposed to pretend it was water, which is something else. The fear of uncertainty, fear and uncertainty does for you. Now, to get off on a bit of a tangent, it's relevant. If you followed me so far, you know I always bring it around to the central point. How many self-educated people do you know? You may be self-educated. I am largely self-educated. And among the self-educated, you find things like shelves full of books in their homes. And due to the lamentable state of academia these days, it is necessary to become self-educated if you want to be a deep thinker, or if you want to think at all, actually. There's a problem with self-education, and I think I started to realize this, well, decades ago, thank God. But I've seen friends who've gone down that road who had a somewhat different outcome, at least I hope different from mine. What happens when you start to self-educate? You read a book. Yay! A book. More than one, of course. You know, we're not a man of one book, are we? That book gives you something new and exciting to think about. Oh, wow, this explains a lot. Boy, oh boy, oh boy. And that book leads you to other books. Probably in the bibliography, or the person will mention other books inciting, or he's perhaps a member, in particular, the author is a member, a particularly articulate member of a school of thought. You start following that train. And after a while, what is happening is your vision is tunneling like this. You start to see everything from that perspective, and only from that perspective. You become a man of one map. One map that explains everything. In this day and age, how many people do you know who think that all social phenomenon in America is explained by racism? I saw somewhere someone I rather like, a respected minor academic, who, quoting somebody, a more respected academic from Harvard, that support for Donald Trump is entirely based on racism and the desire for the ethnic cleansing of brown people. And he said, of course, true, without a doubt. Aside from the fact that somebody who really, really doesn't like being called a racist is going to get a tad steamed about this, and if it's repeated often enough, really steamed. What this does, it reduces all human motivation, all the complex motivations of millions and millions of people, down to one simple thing. And this is, if you have seen my video on racism and identity politics, wherein I point out that this assumes that racism is always and forever the same thing, that there are no subtle variations or not so subtle variations in racism. I mentioned, for example, the conundrum of course, we don't have a problem saying that somebody thinks his own race is superior in every way to another race, or superior, but what if he thinks it's superior in one ways but not others? Worse, what would you say about somebody who believes that there is a superior race, but it's not his own? Ta-da! Already you start to run into problems. And what is this explanation? They all voted for Trump because they're racists. It reduces complex phenomena to something entirely different. Now to something very, very simple. Now, you could, of course, add a layer of complexity by saying, well, they're racist because they're economically insecure. Because the fact is that these toe theories are often very, very elaborate, and, in fact, they tend to become more and more complex within a very narrow range of tunnel vision, because you have to start evoking new causes to explain things that really aren't covered by the model. This is where you run into a little principle called Occam's razor, which goes entia non multiplicanda praeter necessitatem. As root causes should not be multiplied without necessity. This is usually paraphrased as when you're confronted by different hypotheses, the simplest one is more likely to be true. That's not exactly what it says. What it says is that a theory that starts becoming more and more complex in terms of root causes is one which is a theory which is floundering. Multiplying root causes is something like floundering when you're drowning. You're trying to save the model. You're not trying to look for truth. Now, the implication of this would seem to be is that if you really want to understand, if you want to achieve a depth of understanding of everything you see around you, multiple models. You need to understand a bit about psychology, you need to understand a bit about sociology, you need to understand something about economics and such, and you need to be able to switch from one thing to the other. One of the reasons, of course, being about this is, one, people are complicated. And in mass, they tend to follow certain rules and things. There's a very simple principle called Gresham's law, which nicely reduces the behavior of masses of people to something fairly simple, evoking a very few root causes. But it's not it's a law. It's not a theory of everything. It's a piece of a theory. It's an aspect of it. Gresham's law is bad money drives good money out of circulation, meaning if there are two currencies circulating and one is worth less or worthless and the other is actually worth something, say take gold and paper, something like that, what are people going to do? People are going to hoard the currency they perceive as valuable, and they're going to try to unload the currency which they see, say, a rapidly depreciating paper currency. Now, it says nothing about the behavior of any single individual. It says nothing about free will, or determinism. You are quite free to be stupid, which simply means that you spend your gold and hoard your paper. It simply means the gold will stay in circulation until it falls into the hands of someone who isn't stupid. That's all. Now, the consequence of this kind of thinking, this kind of tunnel vision there, of course, is perhaps I shouldn't say of course so often. Some people who irritate me say of course a lot, but is that people who are invested in this single model, this toe theory, tend to get extremely defensive about it, and they tend to get extremely angry when contradicted, because this is shaking the foundations of their reality. Someone who believes that the mass of our countrymen are xenophobic, bigot, racists, everything like that, is going to be upset when this is challenged. For example, if you do not happen to be a bigot, xenophobic, racist, rat fink, fascist, Nazi, whatever, and you have a friend who is convinced that all disagreement comes from this, he's going to start getting angrier and angrier, and yes, I have people in mind. He's going to be angrier and angrier with you, because if he knows you well and knows you are not one, this shakes his theory eventually. So what is he going to have to do? He's going to have to convince himself that you are one, and I am reasonably certain that this is the reason that our political differences these days are dividing us in such a way that neighbors are getting to hate each other, that old established friendships are breaking up, and families even. And that's, folks, it's got to be really serious when a disagreement like this, not behavior, but a disagreement, breaks up a family. Okay. So I mentioned the self-educated, the half-educated, the man of one map. And here, what can be done about this? I don't know. A lot of this depends upon reflection and honestly looking at other points of view. And way back when, and I, by the way, hasten to add, special pleading aside, I know a lot of people I agree with who on a number of things. Fellow libertarians, I know objectivists. I'm not an objectivist. I can get along with objectivists generally. Generally, there are some significant exceptions about this. They're all people of one map. It is particularly predominant on the left, where you have a degree of lockstep thinking with a very narrow range of permissible disagreement, and seemingly growing narrower all the time. With the attendant phenomenon of witch hunts for wrongthink and such. But you do see it on the right, and I'm afraid to say I've seen it among my fellow libertarians a lot. They have one map. Liberty fixes everything. No, folks, you need structure. And once, for example, when I mentioned that when dealing with libertarian organizations, I'd found that they have a problem with things like returning their mail, returning your phone calls or your emails. And I said, may I say that if you claim to be able to or know how to organize a nation-sized society and you can't answer your mail, your credibility is in serious question. And a common response I get, I have no interest in organizing a nation-sized society. Okay, perhaps organize isn't quite the right word, but my strong impression was that these people were not just, they were knee-jerk anti-authoritarians, but also just seem to have the idea back here that a free society doesn't have a structure, or not much of one, or a very simple one. No. Alexander Hamilton was right. A free society needs a very elaborate structure of laws. Something I had my nose rubbed in Eastern Europe, for example, is that free societies have many and complex laws. It is tyrannies that have few and simple laws. I think that's enough on this subject for today. There's much I have not covered, but I would like you to think about it, and as usual, I would value your input. I'm Stephen Brown. This is Rants and Raves Video Edition. Good morning.